when I was applying for jobs, I would always think about, okay, why would someone choose me compared to someone else? And I often would think that, like the first thing that people would do is Google me and see what's out there. And so for me, it was important for people to see my like outside interest, like outside of work, because I wanted them to see me for much more than, just being able to do a 9 to 5 job. I wanted them to see me for someone who's determined, for someone who works really hard, because not everyone can say they wrote a book. You know what I mean?
Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redfin.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
With me today on Yes Brand is Urmi Hossain. Urmi is a woman who wears many hats. She's a self-published author, she's speaker, blogger, polyglot, mentor, and holder of both the CFA, the Chartered Financial Analyst, and CAIA, Chartered Alternative Investment Analyst designations. She works in the financial services industry in Canada where she lives, but she's also developed a personal brand separate and apart from that. Her first book, Discovering Your Identity, A Rebirth from Interracial Struggle, is all about her journey of being a third culture kid. She's passionate about women's empowerment, and Urmi's a social media lead for Women in Leadership's Victoria chapter and the campaign manager at Femme Influence. She's a big proponent of learning and self-development, and one of her passions is public speaking. She's been a part of the Toastmasters Club since 2019, where she served in the roles of both VP of Education and President. In her free time, she enjoys reading thriller and mystery books and working out, doing some boxing, some HIIT workouts, some running, but it all contributes to this very unique personal brand. Urmi, welcome to Yes Brand.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. When we met, I was very intrigued by the fact that you work in one industry, but decided to not just do something else, but build your brand around your other interests. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I can definitely tell you that my creation of my own brand, it just happened like that. It was not a conscious effort that I made until I pretty much Googled myself, because people that I was talking to, they were like, "Oh, you have so much going on every time we Google your name." And then I was like, okay, let me Google my name too and see like what's going on. And then I started to see that all the work that I have done, they came to fruition. Like I saw the results of my work. And that's when I realized that I actually have established a brand and established an online presence, which I was not aware of, because it all happened with one simple action. And then it was sort of like a chain. And then I just continued growing and having a presence online. And I started to see how my brand was also being, it was helping me to get into podcasts. It was helping me to get connected with other people. It was helping me to get invited to do webinars. And that's when I realized that, okay, it wasn't just me working somewhere, but it was me on its own, like my
Yeah,
individual self. And that's how I realized that, oh, I worked on my personal brand.
it's funny to me because what's happening now more often than it used to, and this is since the pandemic, is that people are discovering the power they have to communicate with the world about more than just their job. And, when I work with people in the personal branding space, I think it's super important for them to explore every aspect of their personality because it helps differentiate them in what they're doing. And it seems like with you, something similar happened. It wasn't about your work in the financial sector, but it definitely helped to have a presence out there. What was the thing that triggered the kind of online awareness about you?
So here's the thing. I'm a bit late in the game, and I will tell you in what sense. So my first step into establishing my presence was through my LinkedIn profile. And I knew that if I wanted to sell myself, I had to work on it. And I knew that before doing all these, things related to personal branding, I had a lot to offer. So I listed down everything that everything that I have accomplished. But then later, what happened is it was literally just by pursuing my passions and having my first website. That was, I would say, the starting point because it was what people would see is what you give them, and usually it's the website, so they could see my work. They could see, the articles that I write, my passions. They could see my interests, and that was something that was what really like helped people to know me. But it did not stop there because it was after talking also with other, let's say, entrepreneurs or talking with business owners that told me that, look, it's not enough. If you want to like get yourself out there, you have to work on other things. So then I started to have like a YouTube channel. I started to create like ebooks. I started to have my own book as well. And little by little, I started to see how people would ask me, oh, like, are you interested in doing collaboration? Are you interested in like writing an article? And that's how I realized the power that personal brand had. And when I think about it now retrospectively, I really see that this is how personal brand works. Like it's just like, what do you want people to know about you when you're not in a room? That's what they say.
Yes.
Like, how do you want people to perceive you? And I started to create that perception, and then it became more like the work that I started to do had, I was doing it more with much more awareness. So now, like, I'm a bit more careful when it comes to putting things out there because there is me and there are all this work that I have done, and I want to be remembered for that. I want people to know me for that. Yes.
That's another important part, Ermi, is the online legacy aspect. That comes up a lot in my conversations as well, which is how do you protect the image that you've cultivated? And a lot of it is online. And so, there's a lot we can do to kind of control what we put out there, certainly, and what Google is doing and all of this stuff with AI. It's a the AI only knows what Google tells it or what we tell it or what's put in. It doesn't really have an opinion, but it does shape your brand. Tell us a little bit about your book.
So my book basically was created in 2022. I self-published it in 2022. And basically, how I decided to talk about it was because I was getting invited to different podcasts, and people were always interested in my story. Like I put a little bit about me on my website, but then, people wanted to know more. And my website was not enough. It was not enough, and I had to write it somewhere else. And before creating it, I was inspired by another author who self-published her own book. So I reached out to her. I said, "Oh, tell me a little bit more about your writing process, your publishing process." And she's like, "Oh, you don't need a
Mhm.
publisher. All you have to do is you just self-publish it on Amazon." And so before writing it, of course, I consulted with her. I spoke with a friend, but I also read a book called How to Write a Book in 30 Days. So I read that book, and then after that, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna be serious. I'm gonna sit down every day for 30 minutes, an hour, write, as much as I can. It took me really 30 days to have the initial draft, and then I reached out to someone on freelance, and they not on freelance. I reached out to a freelancer on Fiverr. I think that's how it's called. It's like a freelancing platform. And then she helped me with like editing, formatting, and so forth. And then 2 weeks later, it was basically self-published. And the book. It's basically about my own personal journey as a third culture kid, and I put it out there because I wanted people to know that you're not alone, and I wanted to tell my story. And again, this was part of my branding too, because now people at least they have an idea of cultural background, my ethnical background, and they know where I come from. So that's also like I wanted to give a piece of me out there to the people.
Now, how did all of this kind of align with your job, with your work?
Here's the thing. So you spoke about, how personal branding, it helps you to stand out and build your or have a competitive advantage. And it was pretty much my goal at the end, because finance, like I work in finance, is a very competitive industry. And when I was applying for jobs, I would always think about, okay, why would someone choose me compared to someone else? And I often would think that, like the first thing that people would do is Google me and see what's out there. And so for me, it was important for people to see my like outside interest, like outside of work, because I wanted them to see me for much more than, just being able to do a 9 to 5 job. I wanted them to see me for someone who's determined, for someone who works really hard, because not everyone can say they wrote a book, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for me, I wanted people to see me more for Urmi and not just someone who works in the corporate job. And I realized the importance of having a personal brand, especially because I work in the corporate job, because, it's easy to, the word is uncertain, you could be let go anytime. But if you have a good personal brand, I think chances are that you will be, people will think of you more or your name will come across more than someone who doesn't have that brand.
So
And so
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, 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 go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so when you were interviewing, that would come up, your book and your profile, and
Yes.
so did that lead to a new job in finance?
Guess what? People were always very curious about my interests outside of work. That was usually like the chunk because I feel like every time you go for an interview, it's pretty set the tone. Like it's very professional. You just ask like, what did you do before? What are some of your strengths? What are some of the weaknesses? How did you go over your weaknesses? I would say that it was allowing me whenever I would go to an interview and people would ask me questions such as, "Oh, tell me more about yourself." I would tell them my work experience, but I will also add the fact that, I have a website, that I have a YouTube channel. Like I would bring them up during the conversation. And people were always very pleasantly surprised because it doesn't come across interviews that you have people talking about, interests outside of work, especially because you keep it strictly professional and people are always scared of speaking of other things. But from the other side, I saw a genuine interest in me, and people were always very appreciative of the work that I was doing. Like it was showing a different side of me. It was showing more like my human side. That's how I like to call it. And for me, it was fundamental to talk about this because I wanted to show up as my most authentic self, no matter where I was going to work. And it was important also for me that for whichever company I was going to work, I wanted to make sure that my values were matching the values of the company. So I wanted that kind of alignment with the work that I've been doing and with the work that I was searching for, like in terms of like my day-to-day job.
That's a really interesting point, which is that your core values, your who you are as a person, finding the right fit for a place of employment is all helped by, sharing that much more about you. Whereas if it's a normal hiring process, they don't know that much. They don't know that much, and you don't know that much about the company, and you try to figure it all out. Tell us a little bit about your work on the finance side.
Well, I work in the financial sector. It's been working in the industry for the past 8 years. I worked in different sectors of the economy. I work as a client support administrator. I work in compliance and I work in portfolio management. And this is where I wanted to eventually, this is what I wanted to do eventually. And I finally reached that point. And I'm lucky enough that I have a job that allows me to put that physical boundary, like put that boundary where there's a 9 to 5, but then there's your 5 to 9 where you get to work on the things that you love. And it helps you to be creative, which I'm able to also apply in my day-to-day job. So a lot of the skills that I gain, during my free time, I'm able to leverage them and use them elsewhere, especially from my professional, job as in the portfolio management sector.
Yeah, it allows you to have essentially, a personal life, a life outside of work. And I think in some cases, you know, in my case, I've done a different thing in that I used to be all over the place. I had stand-up comedy I was doing, I was writing, I was doing this and then I consolidated everything under my branding world so that I decided I wanted to do personal brand building for other people and that I would have a show. I would have a podcast. I would do public speaking. So I wrapped it all into that identity. But in your case, you're doing both identities. So what's next on the horizon for you? What's a new, is there a new goal or a new undertaking that's exciting you?
I always have a new goal. I always like to, work on myself, grow professionally and personally. I do have a big dream of being able to deliver a TEDx or a TED Talk. I am also part of the Toastmasters Club where I work on my
Right.
communications and public speaking skills, like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. And I do have a big dream of writing a second book. So I'm putting it out there. I'm putting it out
Yeah.
there in the universe. So hopefully will happen. Those are my two biggest dreams.
Very cool. And so now I like to give the guest the last word. First of all, before you even answer this question, make sure you give the audience your URLs and whatever else where they can find you. It'll be in show notes, but still. And then if you could give a piece of advice to people who are interested in expressing themselves but a little uncertain about how to balance the two, work and personal brands.
Yes, so for people who want to connect with me, I have my LinkedIn profile. It's called Urmi Hossain. I have my YouTube channel called Urmi Hossain. My book is available on Amazon and it's called Discovering Your Identity, A Rebirth from Interracial Struggle. Then there is the Instagram page for Women in Leadership in Victoria. So that where people can find basically all the lives that we do, all the more about mentorship. They can learn more about leadership development program. And in terms of advice, I would definitely say there's so many things I can say. Like, I think working on yourself and on your brand, like your own personal brand, is essential because it's your reputation, it's your story, and personal branding is portable. Like, no matter where you go, it will always be with you. And so it's important to really take time to invest in you, to invest in what you want to be known for. And there are a lot of work that you can do. Like, you can start you know, with some writing. You can start by asking people like, what do you think of me? What are three words that come to your mind when you think of me? So you could start with little conversation that you can have with mentors, you can have with your supervisors, you can have them with your coworkers, you can have them with your friends and family, and from there start to like think a little bit about what are my strengths, what are my unique talents, what is it that I can offer to the people, and think a little bit about your story, because at the end, you're the product. It's not what you're selling. People will come to you because of how they can relate to your story. And we can think of this with the biggest brands out there, like you have Amazon, you have Tesla. At the end of the day, it's the people behind. It's really not about the product. So that would be the advice.
Alright.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.